Hi, everyone. Welcome to this deep dive on religious identity. We are the Listeners Collective. We are a multidisciplinary team of mental health and social justice professionals. This quarter, we are exploring the triad of caste identity, religious identity, and economic position. And this is one of our last sessions as part of the religious identity series. Thank you for joining us. For this session, our guest has chosen to be anonymous, and I am going to request them to introduce themselves just now in whatever length that you would like.
Hi, I am an early career mental health professional, and I grew up in a middle class Muslim family somewhere in a town near the foothills of Himalayas. So I come from a place where I had the access to resources and good support. And at the same time, it was also a place where, women are not expected to or encouraged to be opinionated. So I am just the second woman in the family who stepped out, moved cities for work. Now I live in a metro city in south of India with my partner and family, and my new family is quite diverse. We have people from different faiths, we have atheists, we have different languages and backgrounds here. So now that I look back, my identity, it has been touched by my upbringing, my new family, my friends, so many beautiful people that I have come across on my journey, and also the people that I work with in therapeutic spaces. I carry each one of them somewhere within me.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Could I ask you, like you introduced yourself as coming from a Muslim family, could I ask you when was your first or initial experience of being treated differently or stigmatized perhaps due to your religious background?
Well, that was, I guess, quite early on. Now that I look back, I was in kindergarten, and this was happening in the backdrop of some communal riots that were going on. So on this day, I went to school and nobody would speak to me, and I couldn't figure why. And when I asked my best friend at that time, what's happening? Why won't you talk to me? She just said that this other boy in the class has told them not to talk to me because my family and I were somehow planning to kill them all. And I cried and sobbed, and I was so inconsolable. I don't remember the name of the boy. All I remember is that fierce courage in the eyes of my teacher who stood up and who spoke for me.
That is actually shocking. I don't think I was expecting that early. But also I'm glad that you had a teacher who stood up. I think, yeah, that's such a powerful story. Thank you so much for sharing with us, because I think both how early this can influence, this can play a role um, in our upbringing, but also like the power the teachers hold in like helping shift that narrative. I think both of those are very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that's quite many years ago, and you still remember that, obviously. But through the years, are there other religious microaggressions that you've encountered, or your family members, or anyone that you know, in your day-to-day life, like across different settings, like workplaces, healthcare, educational institutions, renting houses, any context at all that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. It's been like a constant in my life. And when I say constant, it's always been there in the landscape of my identity, just always lurking around like a stray cat, so much so that I barely pay attention to it. So when I was growing up, and I remember my first day of college when we were just introducing each other. I mean, there was no teacher in the classroom, of course. It was just a bunch of us students talking to each other. And when I shared my name, there was this guy who said, oh, so you must be Osama's relative. And the whole class burst into laughter, and I did too along with them. And now that I look back, I come from a place where I had resources, I had good social support, but that doesn't mean that these challenges didn't exist. But I have means to deal with them. Even when I moved cities, I had a lot of, initially I did face that struggle to find a PG, and it was my friends again who came to my rescue, who helped me find a PG where it's hard for me sometimes to contextualize all of this, but now that I have this space where I'm talking about it, I'm able to kind of make sense of how it has been there, always been there. Even my family members, it was a few years ago that there was this social media post by a family member, some conversation on a social media post by which one of my former classmates got so enraged that I won't call it a microaggression as such, but this is a fact, my lived experience. So I just thought of putting it out here that this former classmate went to my house and abused and threatened my parents. It was not someone I didn't know. It was someone I grew up with.
I'm so sorry that you and your family went through that. And also the other things that you shared, right? Like how commonplace that these aggressions are, micro or otherwise. I think, yeah, like you said, it's so normalized, it's so internalized. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure a lot of us don't contextualize it in these spaces, and your willingness to share this here, I think that helps contextualize it for a lot of us in terms of, like, for us, it might be one incident, but for someone who's living through it, it's like just accumulating, right? Like, so thank you so much for sharing that. Could I ask you, I mean, uh, I think this is, I don't know how to phrase this question because it feels almost absurd given like the complexity and just the depth of these aggressions, but how does it make you feel? How does it impact your mental well-being, perhaps?
Now that I think of it, I have felt very tentative. I have felt like a peripheral in my own life. There has been this sense of otherness which I couldn't put a finger on, which I couldn't pin down to anything, but I have carried incredible amount of shame and guilt in me to own my story, to claim my identity. And my stance has always been quite apologetic about it all. I have struggled to take up space, and I still struggle sometimes to take up space. And I guess somewhere along the way, I lost my fears too. I would see my friends, I would see people close to me advocating about these things, and it would be hard for me to figure, why are you even doing it? Because I have so normalized it within myself. I would feel vulnerable, I wouldn't allow myself to engage in it. It was like I would just dip my toes and back off and then strategize to jump to the other side, not willing to sit with the discomfort. And it's been in my personal therapy that I have, again, like I said, not everyone has that privilege I had. Being in therapy, it really helped me process my experiences and validating them. It was in therapy that, there was a time when it got so hard for me feeling like an imposter, and the disconnect between me and my different identities, that it was hard to bear. And in therapy also, I was trying to avoid it. It was not until my therapist told me that authenticity is a privilege that I could take in the entirety, the immenseness of it. I had carried that guilt of not feeling authentic enough. not practicing it, not exercising it. And when my therapist said that it is a privilege and it comes when you have those safe spaces where you can own your stories, where I realized the importance of those safe and nurturing spaces where shame can melt away and you can find your courage.
That is so nuanced and so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, and it's inspiring to see how grounded in where you are. When we started talking about power and powerlessness, the intersections, we did want to acknowledge, there are some spaces that we come with privilege, and there are some spaces that we don't have that privilege. I think how you articulated that to say that you had the privilege to take therapy, but at the same time, you didn't have the privilege to authenticity. I think that's very powerful. Um, Thank you so much for sharing that. I do want to ask, since you've started, recognizing it, like you've come from a place of maybe not recognizing it, maybe not calling it out, to a place of starting to recognize it. Can I ask you what might have helped, starting to recognize it? When did you start recognizing it? When did you start feeling comfortable contextualizing it, addressing it, talking about it, if at all?
It was not an easy thing to do that. Like I said, my go-to mechanism was always to hone my avoidance skills and pretend it's not happening, or make it look like less, make myself look less. And I never felt safe enough to speak about it. The reason being, every time I tried talking about it, even to well-meaning people, while growing up, their stance would be very dismissive. So somewhere I learned that it was not safe to do so. I just had to brush it aside and pretend as if nothing is happening. But there was a point when I became a parent, I realized that when I look at my child, when I look at other children, I don't want them to do that. I want them to claim their identities, to be okay with it, to be at peace with it. And that was also when I found a lot of beautiful people, my tribe, people who have always rooted for me in so many different ways, that I felt responsible for finding my voice back and talking about it.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, and also a little bit heartbreaking. Like I think because in a lot of contexts, I think we hear about this, like about how we don't stand up for ourselves. But I think when you have children, um, everything changes because you obviously want a better life for them. So that's so meaningful, and thank you so much. That resonates a lot. Um, I did want to ask you if over time you've developed any mechanisms or techniques like to avoid microaggressions, like it could be, or just in like when you're faced with something like that, or even to avoid it, like have you come up with any techniques? um
Initially, like I said, I used to dissociate myself a lot from it. I would avoid social media, I would avoid situations or talking about it. But at certain point of time, it stopped working. I'm still not there where I can just not, like I said, not willing to engage in the vulnerability. The point is, when you stop looking the other way, you are pushed to sit with it, and that can be difficult, but I'm learning to do it in smaller chunks, with people whom I feel safe around.
and that makes complete sense. Like I think that's I think that is true, right? Like the way you're approaching it is very grounded. Like you're first dealing with it within yourself, like understanding, processing. That's very meaningful, and I think that's what helps us as a larger society to heal as well. Like when we first heal within, um, that's incredible. And I do want to talk about your experience as a psychotherapy and emotional well-being professional. But before that, I'm also keen to understand if your experience as a Muslim woman in India is is different. Like, because we do talk about, I know this session is focused on religious identity, but I do want to talk about potentially the intersection between being Muslim and being woman, because I know you also started with saying you're the second woman in your family who might have had access to so just to understand, like, have you experienced your religious identity differently because of your gender, if at all?
It's interesting when you said Muslim women. When I say those words myself, being a Muslim woman, the words, they seem so distant and alien at times. I don't remember having called myself a Muslim woman or being comfortable around embracing that identity. I'm learning to be comfortable and unapologetic in doing that. And deep down, I know that I owe it to a lot of people, my family who fought against their own biases and prejudices to make sure that I had access to things which brought me where I am today, to my new family, which has been quite diverse and accepting, and all the amazing people, my friends. And, they are always there rooting for me, sometimes relentlessly and sometimes in silence, sometimes quite loudly. And you know who you are. But being a Muslim woman, that I'm still a long way to go to say it comfortably about myself.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's very honest, and also um, it's very powerful. Like a lot of what you've shared here about this entire interview so far, like about disassociation, about othering. I think these are very. We do want to capture individual experiences, but there is also, like, this trend of how we treat each other as human beings. Like, we do get reduced to these identities, and I think this has been almost a common thread, right? Like this feeling of otherness, this feeling of um, being apologetic for who we are, and not being able to embrace our own identities. So I think the language that you're giving to it is resonating a lot. Thank you so much for sharing that. I do acknowledge that that's also because of your work professionally. You are a psychotherapy and emotional well-being professional, and so there is, a lot of that groundedness and that awareness that you're bringing to how you view your personal um, journey as well. I do want to ask, that is my last question for you. Is there anything that you would like to share with us as a professional, especially given the increasing number of instances in our society in the recent past?
I feel that we as people, we do not exist in vacuum, nor does our mental health. It does exist in the context of gender, caste, religion, social, cultural, political, and our sexual identities. And I have sat and reflected a lot on, I still don't get it. Where does that need to shame people come from? But I know what it does to people, what damage it can do to people. Shaming people for who they are, it can send them somewhere very far and distant, where sometimes parts of them become inaccessible. It does push them sometimes to disown themselves or part of themselves. There are part of themselves which start siding with the hatred in disowning themselves and hating themselves. It chips away at the personhood. I don't know, perhaps that's how hatred works, I guess, wherever it comes from. Like I mentioned earlier, also, I had the privilege to be in therapy and process my own experiences. This is what I aspire to do as a mental health professional, to create and hold those safe and nurturing spaces where shame can melt away. People can feel like themselves, they can speak their narratives, they can own them. And I feel that the wounds that are caused in the societal context, they also call for collective responsibility to fill those spaces where people find their voice, they feel validated. It's so easy to be dismissive and invalidating. And I wonder where it comes from. Does it come from a place of denial where, where we are not willing to acknowledge the discomfort of knowing that it's systemic and we are part of the system? But it takes a lot more courage to sit with the discomfort of witnessing the rawness, the vulnerability. And when we have the privilege, how do we choose to use that privilege? It is something that I ask myself constantly these days.
Thank you so much. It's been great just having you here and listening to your story and to the work that you do. Thank you so much for everything. And obviously, this shouldn't have happened. And yeah, I don't have anything to say to express how sorry I am that this has happened, but only respect and so much goodwill to how you're channeling it all today to help in our collective healing as a society. Before we close the interview, I do want to hold space for anything else you might want to share with us, if at all.
Thank you so much for holding this space for me. You have made it easy. When I came in, I thought I didn't know whether I would be able to do it. And the fact that I have been able to speak about it, it is because you held that space for me where I could talk about my experiences, where perhaps somewhere along the way I would find a way to integrate those lost pieces back into myself. So thank you so much for this. This is very much validating and empowering. I really appreciate you doing that.
I know in your work you do a lot of these spaces, you hold a lot of spaces. Hopefully, maybe that is our way out, potentially. Like you said, there is a lot of systemic factors, but maybe as individuals, maybe just holding space for each other is probably where we go from here.
You're doing a wonderful job at that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.